I've had GoDaddy as a sponsor for my podcast since June of 2005. Okay, that's 12 years. Same sponsor every month. And I make my numbers.
That was Todd Cochrane, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. And my goal is simply to uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. Today's episode, we have Todd Cochrane, who is the CEO of Rawvoice or Blubrry, and the host of Geek News Central Podcast. He's the founder of the People's Choice Podcast Awards, and he wrote one of the first books on podcasting. Now, if you want to learn how your downloads are being calculated, what stats you should analyze, or how to adjust to the demographic of your listeners, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. We'll even talk about ways small niche shows can find podcast advertising deals. Let's get into the show. Cool. So I thought we could start off just by having you talk a little bit about, your relationship with Blubrry and maybe kind of how you got into starting Rawvoice and what it is. What is Rawvoice?
Well, it's, when I started the company in 2005, the podcasting space was obviously brand new. And I had started a show in October of 2004, and basically my wife had said, you got 2 years to figure out how to monetize this thing. And, cause I'd done a bunch of harebrained stuff in the past and not all of it paid off, and podcasting was starting off to be a little bit of a time sink. And so luckily in November of 2004, I got a book deal for writing the first book on podcasting. And then long story short, in June of 2005, GoDaddy called me and said, we want to sponsor your show. And I was doing a tech show, and I still do that show today. It's called Geek News Central. And the first month of the deal, we did really, really well, or I did really, really well with the campaign. And when they came back, they were pretty excited. And there was a bunch of things that happened, renegotiating ad rates and a whole bunch of stuff that I kind of learned trial by fire, because I'm not saying the first, but I was one of the first to do an ad deal. And the keywords the gal from GoDaddy said is, do you know anyone else that wants to do podcast advertising? And I thought, well, I've been working with these guys. We had started this little tech network called Tech Podcasts. I said, they've been all complaining about not making any money. So I said, yeah, I do. And it kind of dawned on me there was a business there. So from my show, I called out and said, I'm looking for a lawyer, biz dev, programmer, graphics guy. We're having a call in 10 days. We use freeconferencecall.com. And then, 9 people show up on a call. And I said, if you're not this and you're not willing to invest in a new business, please hang up. And I heard the phone click, 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 click. And I ended up with three or four people on the call. And the graphics guy that was on the call knew a programmer, and everything else fit perfectly. The biz dev, just basically the team that was on that call ended up being the team that formed Rawvoice. And Rawvoice is the parent company of Blubrry. And from there, really, that's how we started. And we started virtual. We didn't actually we actually didn't meet each other as a company until like 6 months in. And so we were working, I was still active duty Navy, and everyone had full-time jobs, and we just kind of did startup virtual style. And the team, and then that's a story within itself. But, we basically very quickly figured out that we need a way to measure this stuff. So we built the first podcast measurement system. And it took us a little while to get there, but, by late 2005, we actually had the beginnings of what is today our podcast statistics system.
You talk about podcast stats, for those that aren't sure why it's so important. Why is it so important that podcast stats were now trackable for podcasters at that time?
Well, we learned very early on that no one really had a clue on how to measure these things. So we really had to invent the actual system and build it. And we learned very quickly that there was a lot of bot activity, and in the early days, as we got bigger, we were dealing with fraud and you name it. So we had to be able to have a way to get the measurement of the total number of downloads, to the point where I felt comfortable going back and billing the media buyers. So it paid off in spades because I was pretty conservative. I told Angela, I said, I don't care what the number is, as long as I know what the number is. I said, get rid of the stuff that's junk and leave me with a number that is as close to as truth as possible. Now, again, we were still measuring downloads. And, then things are going to change here in a few months when Apple introduces some new stuff. But, up to this point, we really, the basic formula of what we have to report to media buyers has not changed. This is going back all the way to 2005. We know the number of unique IPs that have downloaded a file per episode, and we know the grand total of downloads for that media file per episode. And that is what we bill. If it's 5,000 downloads, we bill for 5,000 downloads. And because most of everything's been direct response up to this point, there hasn't been a lot of, brand campaigns. There's been some, but not as, like maybe a 9-to-1. Nine campaigns are direct response. One campaign is a brand advertiser. When you get done with the campaign and you run 90 days, the direct response people said, well, I just spent $10,000, and I divide that by the number of new customers that we have gotten from that campaign, and they come up with a cost, and then if they're smart, they will have already known what their cost per acquisition is, and they can say, yep, success or no failure. And what we found and what we have found throughout the years is, again, 9 out of 10 times the media buyer comes back and says success. It cost us nationally on print or TV or banner. It cost us, let's say, $42 to acquire a new customer. That's our national average. And when I can come in and do a campaign and we acquire customers for 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, that's how they back it in from a success standpoint. So the numbers are important, because what happens if you overinflate that data, and then all of a sudden when they back the numbers in to what they spent in regards to what they got, and all of a sudden that cost per acquisition gets higher. So let's say I was delivering at 12, and then some other third party came in and all of a sudden they're delivering at 32. Well, all of a sudden it's not such a good advertising campaign. But what happens if they were over-reporting and they were actually delivering at 12, but they were counting by threes? So they really could hurt the podcasting space. So this is what we've been fighting for many, many years, is making sure that everyone, and that's part of the thing that's going on with the IAB right now, to have some measurement standards to make sure most of the podcast companies, or hopefully all, are kind of measuring from the same base idea of, the formula that you need to kind of use. Now, the kicker here is, again, it's in the end, it's really, the filtering is critical. If you don't do the filtering, you could have multipliers of downloads that would blow your mind.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what if I just click refresh on a player, as opposed to what if everyone in my family listens to, we all share the same Wi-Fi. What if they all listen to the same podcast? They know the difference between something like that? They
do, and we do. And here's the shocker for this: if you're sitting there hitting a refresh on the same IP, that's just an obvious one. We're going to say that's not real, because we know when we're looking at this global look of data, we know on average how many times a show gets downloaded from the same IP, and you're going to be shocked. It is such a low percentage that when we see more than 3 downloads coming from the same IP for the same episode, we go, "Who's that?" And we go and we do a look, and oftentimes that IP will end up getting added to a whitelist, because it's so rare that it happens that you go, and we have to take into account things for okay, so I start listening on my iPhone, and maybe I'm not subscribed, and maybe I've actively played, or maybe I'm subscribed, and the media file gets downloaded all the way. I get 3/4 of the way through, my phone needs charged, and I load my computer browser up, and I start the show, I scrub in to the point where I was listening, and finish on my computer. Is that a 1 or is that a 2? In today's world, because we don't know 100%, we're going to count that as a 2. But again, it doesn't happen very often. So the law of averages plays it out that typically we know what the total number of downloads are, and within a degree of accuracy of a couple percentage points, 2 or 3%. We feel that confident in the data. But, if you're dealing with if it's just, and if you've got a little bit of a wag. Now and here's the funny part. You keep hearing about, all these discussions. Oh, podcast metrics or got problems. And I just laugh because I don't hear that. I don't hear that when I talk to media buyers. Of course, again, it's been mostly direct response. And if this is what it takes, if the data that Apple's about to give us, hopefully after Thanksgiving, if the data that Apple's going to give us to show how many people are listening in the podcast app, the Apple Podcast app, if this is what it takes to bring brand advertisers to the table, well, let's go. But it's, to me, I always laugh about usually the people that are complaining about stats are the folks that don't have them or haven't invested the time to put in the filtering and fraud prevention. And we've got, literally tens of thousands of hours tweaking of our stat system to get where we are.
So I know it can get pretty technical, but I guess on a more simplistic kind of view or like a general view, does Blubrry offers the best stats? I mean, what platforms maybe should people avoid? Like, maybe Podomatic is super inaccurate, or how close are you guys to Libsyn? And I guess the goal is that you said how it is before, is to have everyone playing on the same system of this calculation process.
What's ironic is in the early days, it was Libsyn, Podtrac, and us. We were the only ones doing metric for years and years and years. We were it. So we kind of got together ourselves. There was a organization formed in the early days called the Association of Downloadable Media, and we wrote specs back then that we each adhered to. And what's ironic is a lot of those specs we gave to the IEB and said, here you go. Here's what we've been using for the past 10 years. You're welcome to adopt as many of these rules. And Angelo, my CIO, we laughed because, it was like, we've done this work. Now we're helping all these other companies kind of get up to speed. Now, I'm not going to say who I won't. Well, I'll say who I do take. Obviously if I'm on an advertising deal, I want someone on our stats because if I get audited, it's pretty hard for me to send them over to Libsyn and say, I got a show that needs to be audited. That's kind of odd. So we want as many shows as possible, like the 95 percentile to be on our stats on ad deals. If a show is only on Podtrac or if a show is only on Libsyn and they can't get it implemented, I will take their numbers in a pinch. And I know Rob has publicly said that he's happy with our numbers, and so is, the folks over at Podtrac. So we've known each other for so many years. A few others that are getting close, but there are some parties that I absolutely say no. I can't take your data. Sorry. And they'll say why, and I'll be like, well, just, get your system on our, get on our stats, and then we have a discussion. Because more often than not, the big complaint we get from podcasters when they start our stats and they come from a system that maybe hasn't had as much maturity, and I'm going to use that word versus anything else. Maybe that system wasn't as mature to know that you have to filter bots and these random things that happen to cause inflated downloads. So, we were asked to test, and this is surprising, we were asked to test a new company's podcast statistic. They basically wanted to see what we thought of their stats. And Angelo has a script he wrote, and we basically ran the script against their system. And if that test had been implemented, if their system had some maturity to it, the result on that would have been a 1 or a 2 from a download standpoint. Yet their system showed like 800. So they have work to do. And again, it's oftentimes more a maturity thing than someone trying to get over. Although there has been some problem childs in the past that we know, in matter of fact, the media buyers even know are inflate, and they take that into account, and they offer them lower CPM rates on their ad deals because they know that they're, they have a unique way of counting. So the media buyers, someone that's been in space for a while, they get it, and they have their own notes, but yeah, we try to be as accurate as possible.
It's funny because when I first launched my show, I became like super addicted to stats. It's been like just constantly looking and checking. And I think that a lot of people look at stats, but maybe they don't know what to look for. Or at least I don't. Like I look at like demographic, traffic, but like what should people really be looking at when they're looking at their stats?
Well, I think the trending line is a telltale sign of how your show is growing. So I'm in the trending line a lot. Now I don't check, to be honest with you, I check my own personal stats now like once a month. But I was like you, I was refreshing every 5 minutes in the early days. And actually we just had a customer come on that is a paying pro customer, and they're like, we've been hitting refresh and the number's not going up. And I'm like, well, we only import the log files to be processed once an hour. So if you hit and refresh more than once an hour, the number's not going to change. Oh, okay. But if you really, what you need to look at is the trending line of how your show's doing, if it's growing, because what will happen is, and this is a story we tell media buyers, is that if someone subscribed to your show via Apple Podcast app, within them not listening to 5 episodes, the app automatically stops downloading the show. So if you're seeing a steady climb and the podcast iOS app subscriptions continue to climb, it typically means that you're having people subscribe and you're holding audience beyond 5 episodes. Then from that point, I look at my distribution, where and how the show is being listened to. A lot of podcasters get wrapped around the axle in only thinking about iOS, but with the rest of the world has more. There is gobs more of Android phones out there worldwide than there is iOS devices. So in the United States, we're split pretty close, 50-50, with, I think, Android having a slight edge. But the rest of the world, it's like 9-1 Android compared to Apple. So if you're not implementing things like subscribe on Android.com to be able to get people to one-click subscribe on Android, and you're not promoting your show and making it easy for those other device listeners to subscribe, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So look at your spread on how your show's being consumed. And if you see that all of a sudden you're 90% Apple and 1% Android, and they're not coming from anywhere else, well, maybe you need to start promoting in your show and externally that people can subscribe on other devices. So my show, I have about 23-24% of my audience is Android. And that's remarkably high compared to a lot of other shows. But I actively make sure I make it easy for them to subscribe. So it's things like that, and I definitely look at geographic data, where people are coming from. So if I see a country pop in that hasn't been there before and it's there for a couple of shows and it's some obscure place, I'll say, well, hey, and I'll like, hey, Antarctica, who down on the ice is listening? And invariably, I'll get an email from a scientist or someone said, yeah, I'm subscribed to your show and I take you with me out on expeditions. And I've literally had those types of emails. That one specifically I didn't catch in stats, but that's an example of, what could and where you could find people listening to your show. And then oftentimes someone that's subscribed from a country like that, they can become a big advocate in that country in their native language. And all of a sudden you end up with a whole bunch of people from, country you may have had 10 listeners before, you've got 100. So, it's those types of things I look at, and I make sure that I acknowledge the listener from that country.
Yeah, it's funny. You said you had 23% downloads from Android, and I was thinking the whole time, I thought that was common. I thought it was like 80%, like generally across the board. Is that not what you typically see?
No, I see a lot of shows that hardly have any Android penetration whatsoever.
Wow.
They lose completely, and it drives me insane.
And is that because they just say, hey, subscribe on iTunes, and that's all they care about, news and noteworthy, and they just, because I have an Android myself, so I've actually never been on iTunes on my phone.
Yeah. So they may tell them to subscribe on Stitcher, but Stitcher over the last year has dropped from 7% global share to down like 3.5%. So,
crazy,
Stitcher's not the best. Now, and let's be frank. Google hasn't helped us, but Google had 5 people at Podcast Movement. They're looking at it heavy. They understand they're behind, and expect big things out of Google in the next year. But they're behind.
Yeah. I use, I'm trying to think. I bounce between 2 apps. I think it's Podcast Addict. I think that's my top Android, my favorite app to use. I don't know.
It's right now globally, Podcast Addict is number 1 on the Android side.
I love the way it looks, to be honest. That's great. Wow. So that's cool. All right. So there you go. I'm using the most popular. I don't even use Stitcher, honestly. Google Play. I don't even know how to use Google Play.
Most people don't. That's why it's
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. And then, but beyond, I guess just a quick on Apple apps, I guess, what are other people using to download?
I don't have the list in front of me, but,
okay.
Let me just give you the perspective. Podcast Addict only has like 3% global, all right, between Android and iOS, because they've got both. So everyone else falls below that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the Chrome browser gets more podcast listens than any other. It is crazy.
People listen to more podcasts on a desktop, actually?
Than they do via any other app besides the podcast app. Now, that number has decreased considerably. It used to be that browser numbers were a lot higher. But what we see now, even today, is people on their tablet, on an iPad, let's say, and they've used Safari to get to a page, and they're played the podcast from the podcast page within Safari. We see that. So here's the thing. Here's the thing just to remember. The key thing is you don't know how they're going to listen. You just want them to listen, right? Make it as easy as possible for them to get your content no matter what. Don't bury your podcast in a sub-page within your website. They can't, because if you look at your regular web analytics, not podcast analytics, and you go to this bounce rate information, and it shows you how many people come to your website and leave. Most sites are like 90%. People are there 3 seconds and they're gone. You've got 3 seconds to capture them as a subscriber or as a listener. So on my site, subscribe sidebars front and center. The latest show is on the main page. So you just got to give them opportunity to listen where they can, and don't bury your podcasts on sub page 7.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, honestly, what I do sometimes before I'm determining if I want to actually subscribe to a show, that in-between stage where I'm like, I like it, but I'm not totally sure. I literally just Google search them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you sample it, and then I click play right there. Is that Google Play? Or who gets that play? It's Chrome.
Well, it would get whatever browser you use and would get that play. Yeah.
All right. So everyone's thinking, like, whoever's with us this far is thinking, okay, this is great. I'm getting a little more comfortable analyzing stats, what they're all about, goods and bads. But I mean, even someone like me, there's not a whole lot to analyze, right? Especially when you're just starting out, you're building up 10, 20. When you break the 100 mark, I guess the question is, can we talk about some basic advertising strategies to get to that point where you could analyze? And where's that threshold, by the way, where they're overanalyzing when there's too low of a statistic to look at?
Well, I tell podcasters they need to run an audience survey once a year. And, your audience is your audience no matter what size it is. And I be honest with you, I don't focus on size of show. I focus on content when it comes to advertising. That's an addition, that's an ongoing topic that we talk about here. But, you just got to focus on the content in the beginning. Sustained superior content wins the day. The content is the most important thing when you're beginning. Don't worry about the stats. And I know that's hard to tell people that, but just focus on this content. Laser lock in and do the best content you can, and the audience will come. Now, you need to be out there on social media. You need to be in Facebook. You need to be in the places where your audience is. You need to maybe invest a little money, maybe go to a trade show that is of the topic of your show. there's lots and lots of things you can do to build audience. I did everything. I mean, I was relentless in promoting the show, and it didn't mean going in and spamming someone, say, hey, listen to my podcast. I went into communities of geeks because I did a tech show, and I hung out and I answered questions and participated in those communities as a member first, and then people like, what do you do? Well, I have a podcast, and just, they really? Well, where's it at? And I would tell them, they would subscribe. And yes, it was onesie twosies in the beginning, but truly, this sustained superior content wins the day. And that's what you got to focus on. Focus on your trade. Focus on your mic skills. Focus on your ands and buts and hmms. And, I don't edit. I've never edited from the beginning. So because I've got a family, I'm busy, and I can't afford to edit. I'd be divorced. So the key for me was I invested in recording equipment, and I prepared extensively for the show. My prep time is about 2 hours, and then I record. Well, okay, so I got to do an hour and 10 minute show. I got 3 hours and 10 minutes in. I've invested the initial time in the prep, so I've got this great content coming out the other end that doesn't need editing. Sure, it's going to have some raw mistakes. So what? I live with that because I sacrifice editing because of my personal, trying to stay married. So, and there have been divorces from podcasting. I'm warning you. Because people spend 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours editing while the wife is in the kitchen or with the kids or whatever, and it's not good. So focus on the content. But when you're thinking about doing advertising, I think every podcaster that's serious about this needs to think about it from day one. What is the end goal? I was given an ultimatum. You got 2 years. You got to decide at what point you want this thing to start paying you back. If your goal is just to create content, great. There's a segment of podcasters that do that. But when you decide it's time to start getting advertising, this is where your mindset needs to flip. You're no longer a hobbyist. You're a middle stage business guy or gal. And you need to be monitoring the email that would come from me. You need to be monitoring the email address that you would get from Rob Walsh or from Podtrack or whoever you're dealing with. You need to be prepared so that when I send you an email at 10 in the morning, within 2 or 3 hours, you have, the email you need to be reviewing that you are connecting with me with needs to be an email that you load in your phone, that's in your phone, and you have my email address marked as important. Because oftentimes on a Friday, I'll get a call in the morning, say, we've got extra money. We want to launch a campaign today, So is it, and that doesn't happen often, but when it does, if you're watching your email and you say, hey, I got a campaign, you ready to go? And you come back and say, yes, you're on. You might get some money that you wouldn't otherwise. So my main point is just really when you're ready to start advertising, be ready. Be ready to take that email saying we've got an ad deal for you, and here's the information for you to review. Oftentimes I get emails from podcasters 2 weeks later saying, yeah, I'm interested in that deal. And I'm like, well, that train has left. That train left 72 hours after I sent the email. So you would be shocked by the number of podcasters that aren't ready. They say they're ready to do advertising, but they're not ready.
Well, so when you talk about campaigns and advertising, are you talking like Facebook ads or Google AdWords, or what are some things? Have you tried these?
Oh, no, I'm kind of not talking about promoting. I'm actually talking about getting ready to take an ad deal within your podcast for me calling you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me flip back then. As far as promoting your show, I've done some boost your post on Facebook pages. That it has some value, and don't go out and spend $100. Spend $25. If you want to try to boost a post and set your demographics and the boost your post on where you're going to try to. I've been pretty successful with Facebook. Facebook's better than Twitter for sure. But go ahead.
So when's a good time to get into the advertising? I guess most people say 5,000 downloads, or at the bare minimum 1,000 is even to have the audacity to start talking to people. Is that where do people say, all right, when I might be mentally ready, but is my show actually ready?
So it depends on who you're working with. If you're working with mid-roll, you've got to have big numbers, all right? They don't even talk to you to get to a certain point. Some advertisers won't even take a show unless they have 10,000. But I work a little different. I can't speak to what the rest of the folks do. But when I am having a call with a potential advertiser, I said, listen, We know for a fact that smaller shows perform better than bigger shows. They just deliver better ROI because they know their audience and they're more friendly with their audience. They may know a portion of their audience by name, and those smaller shows have a more rabid fan base that are going to be willing to support this podcasters. So I say you don't discount the smaller shows. So when I send over an ad deal to a media buyer, I said, okay, here's my list of 50 shows that I want you to consider. I have picked those shows based upon content and demographic, not by how big the show is. I've had shows on ad deals before that had 162 listeners. And I say, Todd, how do they make any money? Well, I'll talk about that.
Please.
So, and I send the list over, and I don't give the media buyer on round one, they don't see how many downloads the show had. So I make them evaluate the show based on content. So they come back and say, oh man, I love 32 of these. And I'll say, okay, we'll go back and talk to them, and I'll get you a proposal. And this is where I kind of drop the bomb. When I send the proposal back, I say, you have to take all of them. And even the guy that's got 162 listeners. But what we're going to do for that show that has 162 listeners, we're going to pay them a base, a flat rate that's above CPM. And then I'll explain why. So, I'm not going to give the guy with 162 listeners $1,000, but I might give him $25 per episode, which he would not have normally gotten until he reached 1,000 listeners. But because that audience matches, and oftentimes it may be a niche show, the niche show is more valuable, obviously, even more. But typically the media buyers are like, okay, we got to make performance on these shows, and oftentimes I'll argue back, of course. Now, I'm unique. You're not going to get many of the companies to do that, but I build a system to be able to support having shows on ad deals. They're small. Now, be frank. There's not a lot of shows that get ad deals so they have under 62 listeners. I definitely want a show to be above 1,000 listeners. That's really kind of, I will look at a show that's smaller, and I'll take a listen, but sometimes there's a reason that audience is small. And if I listen to the content, oftentimes the subject matter is perfect, but the hosts are horrible. So again, it's not necessarily that there isn't a subject matter match or demographic match. It's just there's a reason the show's only got 162 listeners. Swearing on your show and cussing, that's almost an automatic disqualifier about 99% of the time. So you got to be clean. Now,
wow.
gamers may, because a brand, you're bringing your brand to me, and I'm going to put this company's brand on a show. That podcaster is now technically representing that brand. So they're cognizant of content. If you're a gamer, they're going to probably be a little more lenient, or maybe a sports show. But most podcasts, there really isn't, unless you're a comedy show, there really is not this, why do you have to drop an F-bomb every 5 minutes? Do you really need to? And I've cussed on my show from time to time. Matter of fact, I got scolded on the new media show a couple of weeks ago. I said the S word, and someone come back and said, "What kind of a show are you doing here?" But no one's perfect, but you just try to limit it. But again, I really focus on the content really first and foremost, and I do listen to every show. I sample it, every show that we're going to put on an ad buy. And your first 5 minutes is critical because I make an opinion in 5 minutes. And I think most listeners do too. So if you're coming out of the gate and messing around, you're probably losing listeners. So don't mess around the first 5 minutes of your show. Get to business and mess around at minutes 7 and 8, so give that listener a reason to listen.
Yeah. So, I mean, what about specific, because the funny thing is my friend sent me this website the other day. It's called midroll.com. You've heard this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I don't know anything about it, to be honest. He just sent it to me yesterday.
Yeah, they're big.
Is that must be hard to get on, right? You said midroll is difficult. I mean, you got to be pushing some good. So how are people, like the little people, how are the people that maybe or podcasters that get less downloads, how do they find advertisers? Or maybe they just don't.
Well, here's some history. And first of all, those that are listening, I love independent content creators. Independent content creators make up the majority of this space. So in the early days, there was no Adam Carollas. There was no Serial. There was not big shows. So when we first started advertising, the biggest show that I had running ad deals in the early days was the largest show, 40,000 listeners, 50,000 listeners, was the largest show. That was massive, massive, massive. And the average was 6, 7, 3,000 listeners. So in the early days, all the money, and as a matter of fact, I laughed. The other day I was shredding stuff, old bank records, and I found some of the very first advertising deals that we did. And I looked at a Citrix GoToMeeting campaign where they spent like $36,000 for a quarter, and I had 23 shows on the ad deal. So we spent over 3 months. We split $36,000 amongst 23 shows. You can kind of do the math, kind of figure out what each person got close to. Some got more, some got less. Today, I know of shows that have a minimum of $4,000 net per episode. So what happened about 2000, about the time the economy went to crap. The first year or two after the economy went down in 2008, 9, the ads stayed in the smaller shows. And then there was like this flip. The money all moved upstairs. It all went to the big shows. And for a long time, there has been a significant dry spell for smaller shows. Well, now so much money is coming, and I shouldn't say so much. Enough money's coming into the space right now where the top shows are sold out. And matter of fact, they're pushing the limit. I know one show that's running 6 ads, 2 pre-rolls, 2 mid-rolls, 2 posts in every episode. Is that effective? On an hour-long show, you're probably getting to the point of annoyance. So big shows have had their cake, and they're still going to have their cake, but the inventory sold, and now the media buyers are saying, what else is out there? And I'm like, hey, by the way, remember, we've got 4,000 podcasters that have audience size smaller than 10,000 listeners per episode that are ready and willing and ready to rock and roll on advertising. And they're like, what? So the way I'm selling, and the way I've been selling it, is I'm like, okay, you can buy 10 shows and you can spend $100,000 on 10 shows, and you can get 4 ads a month on each of those 10 shows. You get 40 spots for your advertising spend. Or with me, I can put 100 shows on that ad buy, and you can get 400 ad spots for the same spend and get the same delivery. And when they start thinking about that a little bit, they go, why haven't we been advertising in smaller shows? So it's like it's starting to flip back down. So, and we're working 4 deals right now, and where money's trickling down because there's there's not enough inventory in the top layer. So this is a good time to be a podcaster, again, from an advertising standpoint, because in a couple of years, if as much money comes in space as they're predicting, we're going to be full. We're going to sell everybody. I don't know if I've answered your question or not here.
Yeah. Let's, I want to keep going because I'm curious if, because I want to speak up for the little shows, like me and other, people just starting things like that. And, I assume that there has to be all right. So say if I'm looking for advertisers, right? And maybe my audience is super engaging. Like you said, maybe someone's inflating their numbers and they're getting 5,000, but when they get the sponsor, maybe no one's clicking it, right? So
yeah.
I guess, but how do I sell that as a podcast that only gets 200 to, let's just say 200 downloads, which is half people listening.
Sure.
How do I get someone that says, all right, I have 200 downloads, but I promise you they click and they engage, and maybe they might be at a close payout to, maybe not the same payout, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe you could kind of re-clarify that, where I'm trying to go with that.
If you've got someone on the line and they want to advertise in your show, you do everything you can in your power to get that, to close that deal. And I don't say you give them the advertising, but you say, listen, let's do a trial run. Let's do a month, and you pay me on the number of clients that I bring you. You pay me a flat rate. Do a CPA deal that first go around. And, so you pay me by the number, you pay me $50 per new customer I get you, or whatever it may be. And then you work like a dog on that that first month to deliver on that campaign. But herein lies the problem. And this is where podcasters have to understand this. You're going to have new people coming in the front door, because once you've burned through the smaller audience, or you're going to have a new deal. Now, because there's just not enough bodies to sustain it long term. And podcast movement, in matter of fact, I encourage everyone on September 30th on International Podcast Day, I'm going to be doing a presentation on basically a set of strategies, social media strategies and this, I'm not teaching people how to tweet. This is not the purpose of, and I don't know when this episode's going to be out, so maybe this episode won't even be out in time, but it'll be on, just email me and I will send you a link to the video. I'm going to be doing this thing on how to get people to come into your show. How do you build that audience? And again, I'm a podcaster, so it's a marathon. It's not a race. And sometimes you don't have to worry about the advertising in the beginning. You got to put that couple of hard years of hard work in and doing that sustained superior content. But you do have to have fresh bodies coming in the door in order to sustain the same advertiser month after month. I've had GoDaddy as a sponsor for my podcast since June of 2005. Okay, that's 12 years. Same sponsor every month. And I make my numbers. How do I make my numbers? I have fresh earballs, and I say earballs because I do video and audio. I have fresh eyes and ears coming into my show every month, enough to say, that's cool. He's got GoDaddy as a sponsor. I've heard this ad a couple of times. Let me check that out. So that is a key point to be able to sustain an advertiser in new shows. Or maybe you've got someone that just loves you enough and they want to be in your audience. You just do a flat rate deal. Say, okay, if you've got a small show, give me $100 a month. Unless you are a neurosurgeon and you have neurosurgeons listening to your show. This is where smaller shows and niche pay. So I had a neurosurgeon, real to God, top neurosurgeon in the country, and he had about 3,000 neurosurgeons globally listening to a show. Now, I've never Googled how many neurosurgeons there are in the world, but this guy had a lot of neurosurgeons listening. How much do you think an advertiser paid per episode to be on that show? They paid $20,000.
Wow.
Per episode to reach those 3,000 neurosurgeons. So this is where niche is, if you have the right niche and you are the expert in that niche, you can have a gold mine. So big audience doesn't always end up big bucks. But when you have a niche, it can end up in amazing dollars. This guy quit practicing for a couple of years and actually did his podcast full time. He was doing 4 episodes and was making $80,000. $80,000 a month clear without any liability concerns or nothing. Think about that for a minute,
My mind's blown, to be honest. I'm blown away. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm blown away.
That's a niche, but again, are you going to get $20,000 an episode for a basket weaving show? No. But you might get a knitting company that wants to sponsor a show. There's gold in every pot. Yeah. You just have to really kind of think about where it's at.
Yeah, and I guess some people or a lot of people start out with I don't know if you want to call them like advertisers, but these like Audible, they're more like affiliate marketing, right? Amazon affiliates, Audible. Sure. Do you recommend things like that to get like something, or do you think that's people trying to reach where maybe they're still a little too early in the game to do stuff like that?
By episode 20, I had an advertiser in every episode, and I didn't have a paid advertiser.
Okay.
But my audience, and what it was is I was practicing my trade of delivering ad reads and becoming creative in doing that. This is not something we're not. You've seen that guy on TV that's the pitch man. You want to get this right today because it's going to be a 40. This is the limited offer. And this thing clean. You don't want to become a pitch man, but you got to be able to practice delivering these ads and learning how to incorporate it into the content, finding breakpoints, smooth a host endorsed ad. It doesn't come naturally. So, doing a commission junction affiliate deal and promoting your affiliate deal is a great way to get practice and maybe make some money on the side. But don't promote something that you're not using. You better be using that product. If you're going to do an early ad deal, and let's say you love Audible, you better really actually love Audible and not say that you love Audible. Because if you're promoting Audible and have never listened to an audiobook, you're a hypocrite. And number two, you be honest with your audience. Just be honest. I tell my audience, hey, listen, I think this is a cool product. They're advertising on this show. I have not tried it. I'm just going to tell you straight up. I haven't tried it yet. I want to. I've ordered it. If you guys want to, it's great. Here's the link. I'm honest with the audience when it comes to product pitches. But if I'm having an advertiser's coming in and it's giving me serious money, I've usually spent a month using their product or service, and I know what it does. I know this. Matter of fact, I've already emailed them the shortfalls and said, listen, I think this, and this suck, but everything else is great. And they'll come back to me and says, well, you're doing it wrong. Or, yeah, that's right. Maybe we ought to improve that. And I can tell that in the story I tell my audience. Yeah, I tried this, and this. I love this. I didn't really like this, but I talked to them. They agree they're going to work on that. That is how it works if you're going to be promoting a company. So, yeah, I think those types of deals are fine. But here's what we do see, and I'll tell you the ground truth. When I approach you to do a advertising campaign and it's a CPA deal, 9 out of 10 times those campaigns fail. I'm at the point where I don't do them, because when I ask you to do a CPA-based deal, or let's say a hybrid deal, you get partial CPM and you get partial money for the number of returns. For some reason, there's something psychological that happens with the podcaster, and the podcaster does not put as much effort into those ad deals. If they do, when I come to them saying you're getting X number of CPM per download, it's just something that happens. So, if you're doing CPA deals on your own, in other words, like commission junction or direct response type stuff, you put the same effort into doing a deal like that with me as you do in yourself. And maybe we could do more of these CPA type campaigns, hybrid deals. There's just something that happens. And if someone can figure it out, please tell me, because, I haven't been able to determine where the failure point is on doing deals where they're just purely CPA.
Yeah. And I mean, I say this all the time. I'll be honest, man. I click through the first 18, like I check the show notes. Oh, show starts at 18 minutes in. I click through, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to the podcaster. Sometimes I just want to get to the guts,
Well, that's where I drop the ad, first 25% of the show, and it's usually, and I'm also periodically dropping hints during the show or post show too. So you have to learn where to strategically drop your advertising. Because I'll tell my audience, the reason this show continues and the reason the lights are on, and then this is the God's truth for me. Most people don't know it. I don't take a salary from Rawvoice. My podcast pays my salary. Now, I get a stipend from the company, but if I'm going to be here talking about podcast advertising with you, I got to walk the walk, dude. I got to be able to do this for real. I got to be able to, I have to be able to prove that this is a sustainable model. At some point, I'm going to go on payroll at Blubrry. But at the same point, this, to me, I take this very, very serious when it comes to promoting an advertiser's product. And I tell my audience, listen, my family eats and I pay my car insurance because of you supporting the sponsor. And, tell your friends, family members, and people you know about this product. Maybe you don't need it right now, but maybe you know someone that does. And this is, that's almost like an in-kind donation. You tell your friend to use my promo code, you really just made a donation to the show, even though the person hasn't listened. So I appeal to their senses, and I think every podcaster has to do that. You gotta, otherwise this is part of and I'm not asking you to beg, but just tell your audience, this is the way it is, folks.
Well, they say, people, to look at it from a psychological point of view, people say they react with emotion, and they justify it with logic after. When you buy anything, right? Or you spend any dollars. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah. And you want a relationship with that company, and you want to reward a company that rewards your friends, right?
Todd, I want to end it at that point, man. We've been going on for a little bit, and I think that there's a lot more that you could open up, but I think it's a bit more specific too, depending on the show. So if someone wants a little more info on advertising and they want to drill down some more statistics, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they can go to todd@blubrry.com. They can email me. We have a part of our website dedicated to podcasters. If they go to create.blubrry.com, there's a section there that says podcaster advertising, and we've got a video that I really deep dive into the actual process and how we work with podcasters, and you can actually apply to be on our list. You fill out an advertising questionnaire, and we ask you to get on stats. And we've even got a place where you can become a priority partner, and that allows you to get a higher percentage of the rev share. We typically do 50-50 if you're not a partner. If you're a priority partner, and that's basically reading through an agreement, and basically by all you're really doing by becoming a priority partner with us is agreeing to check your email every day, and then we up you're going to laugh. That's the essence. We do a 70-30 split then. So pretty simple task to work with us. But anyway, that information's on the website, and really everything a podcaster should need to be at least considered. We don't guarantee anything, but just let us give a shot to try to sell a spot in your show.
Cool. I like it. Thanks for coming on, Todd. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the 10th episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out Todd's podcast, or you want to find out if your show is ready to get an ad deal, go to podcastninja.net/10 and check out the links. I'll talk to you soon.
Podcast Ninja.